So with no further ado, Seth, if you could.
Hey folks, how's everyone doing tonight? Good. So we've got a lot we can talk about. I need to first give the caveat as a state worker, any opinions expressed are my own and not necessarily of my commission. For the most part, I'm going to try and kind of give you all the insight as to what we would do on the state side as we work through the plug and abandonment program into the decommissioning of a platform like Platform Holly. One thing I think that's important, and I'll just get to this right away with what Ronaldo had asked about, is there are a total of 27 platforms offshore California. 4 of those platforms are in state waters. 23 of those are in the federal OCS. So as a general rule, the role that the State Lands Commission has is plenary authority over the 4 platforms in state waters, subject to a whole series of statutory frameworks and leasing frameworks that go along with that. As it relates to the other 23 platforms that are in federal waters, it's a whole different issue. And I think much to Claire's point earlier, a lot of that has to do with what happens down the road on potential rigs to reefs issues. And I'm not going to speak to that as a positive or a negative, but there are limitations on what current federal operators are willing to engage in based on limitations in the existing rigs to reefs bill. And that's because of liability issues. So this is a recent picture of Platform Holly. Just for those of you who aren't as familiar with it, as Claire mentioned, in 2017, Vinico, the company that was operating Platform Holly, went bankrupt and they walked off the site. State Lands Commission stepped in. We brought in operators to maintain the site so that we didn't have problems with like an oil spill or anything else. One of the problems that we're engaged in right now is called plug and abandonment. We have 30 wells on Platform Holly that are open. They're open to production capabilities, so we have to close them. That's what we call plug and abandonment. That's the first thing you do before you can begin even discussing decommissioning and whatever may come in the future as it relates to the platform. What's interesting here is that this picture is very recent and it doesn't look any different for a lot of people, but the entire top deck has been completely repurposed because the old operations had been so degraded. So we actually had to rebuild parts of the platform so that we can plug and abandon and ultimately decommission it. And the other thing that I think is really interesting on Platform Holly, unlike any of the other 3 platforms or the other 3 platforms in state water, is Holly is the anchored the deepest. It's in 211 feet of water. Everything else is in much lower, 60 feet or less. So there are differences in terms of sort of the ecosystem that attaches to the subsurface that Milton Love and others can talk about here. And I have some video just to show you actual video of Holly based on a recent dive. So as I noted here, this is Frank Kinnaman. He works with UCSB on a hydrocarbon study with Dr. Valentine. If you can scroll to 40 seconds, that's where they start to go underwater. And it's a good video, nice high definition GoPro video that, for those of you who have never dived under, give you a great view of what we're talking about. All of those kind of orange pieces or casings, those go external to each well, so there are 30 casings. It's a secondary containment. This is the actual jacket of the platform that they're getting ready to go down, completely colonized with various bivalves, and you'll see all kinds of different echinoderms and other things like that on here. So this is interesting. One of the other things you may notice is all the bubbles. Those are not bubbles from the breathing apparatus. That is actually the natural seeps that underlie Platform Holly and behind them. So that is gas, that is seep gas. Every once in a while you may see a small, slightly darker colored bubble coming up, but it's oil, and it's just constantly percolating. So this, I'm just going to let run, watch it. But the idea behind all of this for the purposes of the platform is there is a lot. I mean, regularly these platforms have to be cleaned, and the biomass has to be scraped off down to a certain level to ensure that, that the structural integrity of the platform can be assessed. Below that level, they allow the growth to continue. And so in this particular case, you have a very unique operation like you do on the 23 platforms offshore in the federal OCS of having a vertical column that runs just shy of 200 feet down to the water's floor, or to the sea floor, which allows for this really unprecedented sort of growth in terms of the ecosystems and the different kind of clines that are associated with the different levels in the water. So this is just sort of fascinating, and I think it's a very beautiful example of what's there just in terms of this one particular platform. This platform also is not huge in comparison to the other federal platforms. They're physically larger, meaning that the biomass associated with the development on the platform is greater. So again, very interesting kind of background information. The biggest question, I think, for today's topic is everybody wants to know what to do with the platform, and we don't have a position on that. The commission's position is that under the lease and under the laws that the state has created, the commission's expectation is that we can compel the full removal and site restoration, but that there's also flexibility to assess whether or not that's the appropriate determination. And that's something that is going to be entirely driven by a lot, quite frankly, public interaction. When the commission begins the physical decommissioning process, we will be doing it through the kickoff of a California Environmental Quality Act EIR, Environmental Impact Report. And that's going to be important because when we do the environmental impact report, we'll have a scoping meeting, kind of like what we would have here. Everyone would be invited. We would be taking ideas from everyone, so ideas about what types of alternatives may be available. Those would be assessed through the process in CEQA, through full public review and our review internally to look at what's feasible, what's technically feasible, what's not, what has environmental benefits, what are the environmental pros and cons. After which point, once we've gone through the process of fully scoping out the entire EIR, we go through and do all the analysis. We look at, like I said, the pros and cons for every major alternative that gets carried through on the EIR. That final document will then go to our commissioners, and our commissioners will be looking at the comments that folks have sent in and the comments that folks are making in real time during that CEQA determination to determine what alternative they believe is in the best interests of the state. At which point they can make a decision and the commission can follow through, the commission staff and contractors will follow through on whatever that decision may be. If it's full removal and site restoration, that's what we do. If it is a partial removal with some sort of reefing option, that's something we can do. One of the unique things here that's a little different from the federal platforms is that the commission, as the plenary authority over the sovereign lands that these platforms sit on, does have the ability to do something akin to a reefing option. It is not limited by the rigs to reefs legislation. And so it does allow us to really take in the full panoply of potential public comment and ideas. And whether it is something like turning it into a wind farm or working on some other wave energy program, these are all options we can look into and assess. And the commission would then have the opportunity of having the benefit of all the wisdom of the public and their thought process on this and really assessing what the needs for the state are. The next picture is a little overfly of Rankin Island. This is a little farther south from you guys. This is down Ventura County area, but this is the other decommissioning project that the State Lands Commission is working on. This one's interesting. It's a man-made island out in the middle of the water. It's about 2,700 feet offshore. And again, the interesting part about this is that particular island is built with these rocky tetrahedrons in a very unique area that has created basically anchor points for kelp and for other marine biota. It's actually one of the top lobster spots in California, largely probably because of the protective elements that are created by the island. Again, much like with Platform Holly, this is going to go through the same kind of CEQA treatment, the same environmental impact report assessment, because the commission has to assess whether or not full removal and site restoration is actually in the best interests, or whether some modification or modified use is a better opportunity. So while I won't weigh in on telling you what the best option is, because I don't know. I mean, we are really looking for sort of this collaborative interaction between the public and our commissioners and the commission staff. I do understand there is a huge spectrum of possible alternatives, and we're looking forward to exploring them with you. So,
Seth, give me a sense of the timetable for the commission
Sure.
on Holly, because that's right up for a decision.
It is. So, well, actually, it's a little bit reversed on that. So, Rankin Island, we're about 47 out of about 80 wells plugged and abandoned. We have just kicked off the full plug and abandonment of Platform Holly. Platform Holly will be conservatively 3 years of plug and abandonment. The part and parcel with that relative to Rankin is that there will be an overlap where we'll start the EIR process prior to the completion of plug and abandonment, so that when we are ready to start the decommissioning process, the physical removal or modification of the infrastructure, that will all be done in advance. So we'll have gone through the process of that to inform the commission and inform the public of what direction we may go. So there is still some time. The commission's I will say that the commission's decommissioning of Platform Holly will be ahead of the federal platforms just because of where we are on these things, and some of the other federal platforms are larger. The other two Vinico-owned platforms were Gale and Grace. They're in federal waters. Chevron is responsible for removing those at this point, and they are actually planning on doing a full removal of those platforms because there isn't a viable rigs to reefs option for them. And so for liability purposes, they need to get rid of it. And it is one of the big questions that we're going to grapple with at the commission as well. And my job as an attorney is to assess if we are going to keep a platform out there, not in a production setting. The oil and gas aspect of that is gone, right? It's just, you have this giant superstructure that's in 211 feet of water that has to be maintained. And who's going to do that? Who's going to maintain it? Who's going to take liability for it? Should the state ultimately take liability for it if it, collapses and somebody gets hurt or there's some other issue? So that's one of the things we have to grapple with as far as what's available. If there is a great modified use that allows, a productive economic life out of the platform and, kind of ticks all the boxes, and we can find a way to basically shift that liability from us as taxpayers together to an operator or a corporation that wants to operate out there, that's great. Or if the public as a whole says, we want to take that liability on because we see other benefits to it, again, that's the kind of thing that we can take into account through the commission and through our ongoing kind of public outreach.
Explain to the commissioner's office.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Our commission is made up of 3 individuals. It is the Lieutenant Governor, Eleni Kounalakis, the Controller, Betty Yee, and the Director of Finance. And directors, I'm drawing a blank real quick. Keely Bosler, thank you. We have 2 elected officials and an appointed official with in the direct chain of command with the Governor of California. So that is our administrative body for this. And again, when this all starts up, the commission is very responsive to community input. And I think that's important to the extent that you have a view or a vision for where things should go. We need to know, and you need to not be shy about it, and you need to come to us and kind of help us build out what you see as a potential vision so that we can take that through and evaluate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.